Ultimately, I think for us to be connected to our food in a really meaningful way can just transform this nation. My name is Michael Kelly. I'm the founder of GIY. I had a very strange route to this career in the sense that I have no horticultural background. I worked in IT for a long time, and I suppose in my 20s and early 30s I was very interested in food and liked eating and cooking, but I was not really thinking about where my food was coming from. And then I had a kind of a really odd moment in the supermarket. I was doing my shopping and about to throw a bulb of garlic into the trolley and noticed on the label it said product of China. It struck me as being very strange, and I just got really curious, like, why were we importing garlic from China, something so small and so cheap, going on such a bizarre journey around the globe to end up on a shelf in a supermarket in Waterford for sale for like 50 cents or €1 or whatever. It might have been a pound even back then. And I decided to try and grow some of my own garlic just to see, was it possible? And of course it is. And I still remember the day of harvesting this bulb of garlic out of the ground and feeling this sense of awe that I was able to produce this food in my own back garden. What I noticed was that over time my connection with food was being strengthened. I understood where my food was coming from, how it's produced, the effort involved, the value in it. But what interested me most of all was that even though I was only growing maybe 5 or 10% of the food I was eating, it started to change the other 90 or 95% of the food I was eating. And that's because I think when you grow some food yourself, what you can't grow yourself, you tend to seek out the next best thing. When GIY started, we started to kind of research what was actually happening with people in terms of their behaviours and their mindsets and their attitudes around food. And we found a real commonality, actually, that if we can get people to stay growing for maybe a period of 3 to 5 years, that these food empathy behaviours start to creep in. And we coined the phrase food empathy to describe it because it felt like it was a sort of an empathy switch that was happening, that people were just changing their overall behaviours and attitudes around food. The primary ones were people would be eating more plants, they'd be wasting less food, they understand soil and seasons, so they were kind of connecting back in, eating more seasonal food, buying more local food, more seasonal food, more organic food, and so on. GIY started in 2008. I originally set it up as a sort of a group. There was very little out there to support people like me that were interested in growing, not from a gardening perspective or from an ornamental perspective, but just from a food perspective. It became a kind of a national movement, an organisation pretty quickly. Started engaging with the council here in Waterford in 2015. They gave us this site pretty much in the city centre here in Waterford. We set about setting it up as Grow HQ, which is a place where people can come and they can learn how to grow food, they can develop those food empathy behaviours, but most importantly, in the restaurant behind me, they can come and experience what real food should taste like. The consumers that we're trying to change the mindsets of, it's so important that we actually show those consumers where their food is grown, how it's produced, because creating this army of food empathetic consumers is so important to bridge that kind of urban-rural divide that's there. That lack of understanding that exists between farmers and consumers, I think, is a huge part of the problems we have in our food systems. Through places like this, where you're putting food growing under people's noses in a city, is very important. We do a huge amount of work in schools. We've well over 5,500 schools across Ireland and the UK that we've run school growing programs in. Bringing students here to learn where their food comes from is so important. Let's look at the big picture for a second. We've got this really extractive food system that's doing huge damage to the planet, both in terms of greenhouse gas emissions and biodiversity loss and so on. So we've got huge problems, and then at the same time, it's not doing a very good job of keeping people well, particularly in this country. And then obviously in other countries, not doing a very good job of keeping people fed. So we've got this, what's often being called a syndemic of climate emergency and then diet-related chronic ill health, both of which are affecting billions of people around the world. If we can get people growing some of their own food, developing these food empathy behaviours, and get back to eating whole foods as fresh as possible, in season, as close to 0 food miles as we can, that can absolutely transform Ireland. We can have a much healthier population, for one thing, physically and mentally. We can have local growers and farmers doing well and thriving, so we could have a much more sustainable local economy at the same time. I think it's so important for us to have resilient societies, and I think food is a brilliant way to achieve that.